Welcome to Mystery at 221B, where Sherlock Holmes' secrets come to life.
In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Manor, a crimson lantern burns with a sinister glow, hiding a deadly secret. When young Clara Ashby is found lifeless beneath its eerie light, was it a tragic fall, or a murder most cunning? Why did she fear the lantern's gaze? What dark truth did she uncover in her father's study? Sherlock Holmes, the meticulous Belgian detective, steps into a web of lies, hidden letters, and poisoned shadows. Can his little gray cells unravel a killer's trap before another life is claimed? Dive into a mystery where every clue matters, and the truth lies in the lantern's haunting light. Chapter 1. The Shadow of Blackthorn Manor. In the waning days of October, when the mists clung to the English countryside like a shroud, the village of Haverford lay quiet beneath a sky of leaden grey. The air carried the damp chill of autumn, and the leaves, brittle and crimson, whispered secrets as they fell upon the cobbled lanes. Blackthorn Manor, an imposing edifice of weathered stone, stood at the edge of the village, its gabled roofs and tall chimneys looming over the landscape like a sentinel from a bygone era. To the villagers, it was a place of whispered legends, of old wealth and older grudges, and on this particular evening, it was a house poised on the brink of tragedy. Captain Arthur Hastings, recently returned from a sojourn in London, found himself invited to Blackthorn Manor as a guest of Sir Reginald Ashby, a baronet of considerable means and a reputation for eccentricity. Hastings, ever the affable companion, had accepted the invitation with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, for Sir Reginald's letters had hinted at some disquiet within the household, a matter, he wrote, that required a man of discretion and keen observation. The good captain, though no detective himself, had immediately thought of his friend, Sherlock Holmes, the Belgian detective whose fastidious habits and unparalleled intellect had unraveled many a mystery. Yet for now, Hastings arrived alone, his friend detained in London by another case. The manor's great oak doors creaked open to reveal a grand hall adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow the newcomer. A fire crackled in the immense hearth, casting flickering shadows across the polished floor. Sir Reginald, a tall, gaunt man with a shock of white hair and a nervous demeanor, greeted Hastings with a handshake that trembled slightly. "Captain Hastings, you are most welcome," said Sir Reginald, his voice a strained tenor. "I trust your journey was not too taxing." "Not at all, Sir Reginald," replied Hastings, brushing the damp from his coat. "Though I confess, your letter piqued my curiosity. You spoke of some unrest?" Sir Reginald's eyes darted to the side, as though fearful of being overheard. Yes. Unrest is the word. But come, let us join the others. Dinner awaits and you shall meet the household. Perhaps then you will understand." The dining room was a study in opulence, its long mahogany table set with gleaming silver and crystal. Around it sat the assembled company, a curious assortment of characters whose polite smiles did little to mask the undercurrent of tension. Lady Beatrice Ashby, Sir Reginald's wife, was a woman of striking beauty. Her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, though her eyes held a guarded wariness. Beside her sat their daughter, Clara, a pale young woman of 22, whose delicate hands fidgeted with her napkin. Across from her was Dr. Lionel Grayson, the family physician, a man of middle years with a scholarly air and a habit of adjusting his spectacles. Next to him lounged Victor Langley, a rakish nephew of Sir Reginald's, whose easy charm and sharp wit seemed to set the others on edge. Finally, there was Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, the housekeeper, a severe woman whose presence at the table was unusual, her sharp gaze missing nothing. Dinner proceeded with the usual pleasantries, though Hastings noted the strained silences that punctuated the conversation. Sir Reginald spoke of the estate's history, of the crimson lantern that hung in the great hall, a relic, he said, from a long-ago ancestor who had used it to signal ships during a storm. Clara, however, seemed distracted, her eyes flitting to the windows as though expecting some unseen visitor. Victor Langley, meanwhile, regaled the table with tales of his travels, though his anecdotes carried a barbed edge, particularly when directed at Dr. Grayson. As the dessert course was served, a rich plum pudding drenched in brandy sauce, Hastings observed a peculiar incident. Clara, reaching for her wineglass, knocked it over, the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. She gasped, her face paling further, and Lady Beatrice quickly rose to her aid, murmuring reassurances. Dr. Grayson, too, stood, offering to fetch a sedative, but Clara waved him away, insisting it was merely clumsiness. "My apologies," she said, her voice trembling. "I am not myself tonight." The incident might have passed unnoticed, but Hastings, with his soldier's instinct for detail, noted the way Mrs. Whitmore's lips tightened, as though she knew something the others did not. Sir Reginald, too, seemed agitated, his fork clattering against his plate. The crimson stain on the tablecloth seemed to hold the room's attention, a silent omen of what was to come. As the party retired to the drawing room, Hastings found himself alone with Sir Reginald by the fire. The baronet leaned close, his voice low. "Captain, I must confide in you. There is a shadow over this house, a matter of grave concern. I fear for Clara. She has been not herself, and there are other Holmes!" Before Hastings could respond, a piercing scream shattered the quiet. It came from the direction of the great hall, and the entire party rushed toward the sound. There, at the foot of the grand staircase, lay Clara Ashby, her body crumpled, her eyes wide and unseeing. Above her, swaying gently in the draught, hung the crimson lantern, its light casting a ghastly glow over the scene. Dr. Grayson knelt beside her, his fingers searching for a pulse. After a moment, he looked up, his face ashen. "She is dead," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lady Beatrice let out a cry, collapsing into her husband's arms. Victor Langley stood frozen, his usual bravado gone. Mrs. Whitmore, however, remained eerily composed, her eyes fixed on the crimson lantern as though it held some secret. Hastings, his heart pounding, took in the scene with a soldier's clarity. The position of Clara's body, the absence of any visible wound, the strange stillness of the house, it all suggested something far more sinister than an accident. He knew then that this was no mere tragedy, but a puzzle that required the keen mind of Sherlock Holmes. As the household dissolved into chaos, Hastings slipped away to the telephone in the study. He dialed a familiar number, his voice steady despite the horror of the moment. "Sherlock," he said when the line connected, "you must come at once. There has been a death at Blackthorn Manor, and I fear it is no accident. The crimson lantern, it holds the key, I am certain of it." On the other end, the calm, precise voice of Sherlock Holmes replied, "Mon ami, I shall be there by morning. Observe everything, Hastings, and touch nothing. The little grey cells, they are already at work." As Hastings hung up the receiver, he glanced at the crimson lantern, still swaying gently in the hall. Its light seemed to pulse, as though alive with the secrets of Blackthorn Manor. The stage was set, the players assembled, and the game, as Sherlock would say, was afoot. Chapter 2. The Crimson Stain. The night at Blackthorn Manor had grown oppressively still, the air thick with the scent of wax and wood smoke, as though the house itself held its breath. The great hall, where Clara Ashby's body lay, was now a tableau of grief and suspicion, the crimson lantern casting its eerie glow over the scene. Captain Arthur Hastings stood at the edge of the gathering, his soldier's instincts urging him to note every detail. The way Lady Beatrice clutched her husband's arm, her sobs muffled but theatrical. The rigid posture of Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, who seemed more sentinel than housekeeper, and the pallor of Victor Langley, whose usual swagger had given way to a nervous fidgeting with his cufflinks. Dr. Lionel Grayson, still kneeling beside Clara's body, muttered medical observations to himself, his hands trembling as he closed her unseeing eyes. The local constable, a stout man named Burrows, had arrived shortly after Hastings' call to Sherlock Holmes. Burrows, with his ruddy cheeks and air of earnest incompetence, fumbled through a notebook, asking halting questions that did little to pierce the fog of shock enveloping the household. "A tragic accident, no doubt," he ventured, eyeing the steep staircase. "A slip, perhaps, in the dark?" Hastings, however, was unconvinced. The position of Clara's body, her arms splayed unnaturally, her head at an odd angle, suggested something more deliberate. The absence of blood or visible injury only deepened his unease. He recalled Sherlock's maxim, "When the obvious is eliminated, Hastings, what remains, however improbable, must be the truth." The thought steadied him, and he resolved to preserve the scene until his friend's arrival. Sir Reginald, his face a mask of anguish, addressed the constable. "An accident? Impossible. Clara was not clumsy. She knew every inch of this house, and those letters." His voice faltered, and he glanced at Hastings as though regretting his outburst. "Letters, sir?" Burrows asked, pencil poised. Sir Reginald hesitated, then shook his head. "A private matter, nothing to do with this." Hastings made a mental note of the exchange. His curiosity piqued. The anonymous letters Sir Reginald had mentioned earlier were clearly significant, yet the baronet seemed reluctant to share their contents. Was it fear, shame, or something darker that sealed his lips? As the constable began to rope off the area, Lady Beatrice broke away from her husband and approached Hastings. Her eyes, red-rimmed but sharp, held a plea. "Captain, you are a man of the world. You have seen such things. Surely you agree this cannot be an accident. Clara was... She was troubled, yes, but not careless. Someone must have..." She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth as though to trap the words. "Troubled, Lady Beatrice?" Hastings asked gently. "In what way?" She glanced at the others, then lowered her voice. "She was distant of late, secretive. I thought it was a young woman's fancy, perhaps a suitor, but now..." Her voice broke, and she turned away, leaving the sentence unfinished. The household was ushered to the drawing room where a fire still burned, though its warmth did little to dispel the chill of suspicion. Mrs. Whitmore served tea with mechanical precision, her face betraying no emotion, though Hastings caught her eyes lingering on Victor Langley, who paced near the window. Dr. Grayson, meanwhile, sat apart, scribbling in a small notebook, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Hastings wondered what the doctor was recording. Medical notes? Hat. He carried a small valise, and his presence seemed to bring a sudden order to the chaos. "Mon ami," Sherlock said, his voice calm but commanding. "You have done well to preserve the scene. Now, let us see what Blackthorn Manor has to tell us." Without waiting for a reply, Sherlock approached Clara's body, his movements deliberate and cat-like. He knelt beside her, his gloved hands hovering over her form without touching. His eyes scanned her face, her hands, the folds of her dress, and then the staircase itself. He paused at the crimson lantern, its light casting a soft glow on his features. "Curieux," he murmured. "This lantern, it is not merely decorative, n'est-ce pas?" Hastings recounted the evening's events, the dinner, Clara's spilled wine, the scream, and the discovery of her body. Sherlock listened in silence, his head tilted slightly, as though hearing a melody only he could discern. When Hastings mentioned the anonymous letters, Sherlock's eyes narrowed. "Letters, you say? And Sir Reginald will not speak of them, most interesting?" Sherlock then turned his attention to the staircase. He ascended slowly, examining each step, his fingers brushing the banister. At the top, he paused, crouching to inspect a small, almost imperceptible mark on the wood, a faint scratch, barely visible in the dim light. "A clue, Hastings," he said softly. "The smallest details, they speak the loudest." Returning to the hall, Sherlock addressed the constable, who stood awkwardly by the door. "Monsieur Burroughs, you will ensure no one disturbs this scene until I have completed my examination, and you will inform me of any theories you may have, however rudimentary." Burroughs nodded, clearly intimidated by the detective's authoritative tone. Sherlock then turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, let us meet this household. The human heart, it is a puzzle more complex than any crime scene." In the drawing room, Sherlock was introduced to the assembled company. Sir Reginald, still shaken, offered a weak greeting. Lady Beatrice regarded Sherlock with a mixture of hope and suspicion, while Victor Langley's attempt at nonchalance was betrayed by a nervous twitch in his jaw. Dr. Grayson rose, extending a hand, but Sherlock merely nodded, his eyes already cataloguing the man's appearance. The ink-stained fingers, the slightly rumpled collar. Mrs. Whitmore, standing by the tea tray, met Sherlock's gaze with a cool detachment that seemed to intrigue him. "Monsieur Sherlock," Sir Reginald began, "we are at a loss. Clara, she was our light. If this was no accident, I beg you to find the truth." Sherlock raised a hand, silencing him. "The truth, Sir Reginald, is like a fine tapestry. It is woven from many threads, and I shall unravel it thread by thread. But first, I must know the time of the scream, precisely."
"After dinner. And where was each of you at that moment?" Sherlock asked, his tone deceptively mild. The answers came haltingly. Sir Reginald and Lady Beatrice had been by the fire. Victor claimed to have been at the window, admiring the night. Dr. Grayson said he was retrieving his notebook from his coat in the hall. Mrs. Whitmore, predictably, had been tending to the tea. Each alibi was delivered with a trace of hesitation, as though the speaker feared scrutiny. Sherlock's lips curved into a faint smile. "Bon. We have a beginning. Now I shall require a room, and I shall examine this house at first light. Hastings, you will assist me. The crimson lantern. It intrigues me. Its light, perhaps, illuminates more than we yet see." As the household dispersed, Hastings followed Sherlock to the guest room, his mind racing. The detective's calm assurance was a balm, yet the weight of Clara's death pressed heavily upon him. The crimson lantern, the anonymous letters, the scratch on the banister, each was a piece of the puzzle. But how they fit together remained a mystery. In the quiet of the night, as the manor settled into an uneasy slumber, Hastings could not shake the feeling that the walls themselves were watching, guarding secrets that only Sherlock Holmes could uncover. Chapter 3. The Belgian's Arrival. The first light of dawn crept through the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Manor, painting the great hall in hues of pale gold and shadow. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and the lingering dread of the previous night's tragedy. Clara Ashby's body had been moved to a guest room under the watchful eye of Constable Burroughs, but the crimson lantern still hung above the staircase, its glass panels glinting, as though mocking the sorrow below. Captain Arthur Hastings, having slept fitfully, rose early to find Sherlock Holmes already at work, his small, meticulous figure bent over a table in the library, surrounded by maps of the estate and a notebook filled with precise, angular handwriting. Sherlock, immaculate in a fresh suit despite the early hour, greeted Hastings with a nod. "Bon matin, mon ami," he said, his voice crisp. "You look as though you have wrestled with nightmares. Tell me, what did you observe last night beyond the obvious?" Hastings, rubbing his eyes, recounted the details: the spilled wine at dinner, Sir Reginald's mention of anonymous letters, Lady Beatrice's cryptic remark about Clara's secretive behavior, and the peculiar composure of Mrs. Whitmore. Sherlock listened, his fingers steepled, his eyes half closed, as though visualizing the scene. When Hastings mentioned the scratch on the banister, Sherlock's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Excellent, Hastings. The scratch. It is a whisper of truth in a house of lies. But come, we must see the scene in daylight, and then we shall speak with the household."
Silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock, its pendulum marking time with relentless precision. Sherlock moved with purpose, his eyes darting from the staircase to the crimson lantern, which now seemed less ominous in the morning light. He examined the floor where Clara's body had lain, noting the faint outline of chalk left by burrows. Kneeling, he studied the polished wood, his magnifying glass glinting as he traced an almost invisible scuff mark near the base of the stairs. "Curieux," he murmured. "This mark. It is not from a shoe, nor from a fall. It's too precise, too deliberate. Something was placed here, Hastings, and then removed." He ascended the staircase again, pausing at the scratch on the banister. With a small knife, he extracted a splinter of wood, holding it to the light. "Not deep, but fresh," he said. "Made within hours of the tragedy. And see here," he pointed to a faint smudge of wax on the step below. "A candle, perhaps, or something more illuminating." Hastings frowned. A candle? But the hall was lit by the lantern and the chandelier. Why would anyone need a candle? Sherlock's eyes gleamed. Why indeed? That's the question, mon ami. The answers, they hide in the contradictions. Their examination was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Reginald, his face haggard, his eyes bloodshot. "Monsieur Sherlock," he said, his voice hoarse, "have you found anything? I cannot bear this uncertainty. Clara, she was my only child." Sherlock regarded him with a mixture of sympathy and scrutiny. "Sir Reginald, grief is a heavy burden, but truth is heavier still. Tell me of these anonymous letters you mentioned to Captain Hastings. What did they contain?" Sir Reginald hesitated, his hands twisting together. They were threats, vague but menacing. They spoke of secrets, of sins coming to light. I thought them the work of a disgruntled tenant, perhaps, or a prank. But now, he trailed off, glancing at the crimson lantern. "And you kept these letters?" Sherlock pressed. "Yes, in my study. I can show you—" "Not yet," Sherlock interrupted. "First, I must speak with the household. Assemble them, if you please, in the drawing room. The truth, it is like a shy creature. It must be coaxed into the open." The drawing room was much as it had been the previous night, though the fire had died to embers, and the air was thick with unspoken tension. Lady Beatrice sat rigidly, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes avoiding the others. Victor Langley leaned against the mantelpiece, a cigarette dangling from his fingers, though he had not lit it. Dr. Grayson, his notebook now tucked away, adjusted his spectacles nervously. Mrs. Whitmore stood by the door, her presence as unyielding as the manor's stone walls. Sherlock took his place at the center of the room, his small stature commanding attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured. "A tragedy has befallen this house, and I, Sherlock Holmes, am here to uncover its truth. Clara Ashby did not die by accident. This much is certain, but to find her killer, I must know her life, her fears, her secrets, her enemies. Each of you holds a piece of this puzzle. Speak freely, or the truth will find you regardless." The room was silent, the weight of his words settling like dust. Lady Beatrice was the first to speak, her voice trembling but resolute. "Clara was troubled. As I told Captain Hastings, she had been receiving letters too, not like the ones sent to Reginald, but love letters, or so she hinted. She would not show them to me, but they changed her. She grew secretive, withdrawn." Sherlock's eyes narrowed. "These letters, where are they now?" "I don't know," Lady Beatrice admitted. "She kept them in her room, I believe." Sherlock turned to Victor Langley. "Monsieur Langley, you are a man of charm and observation. Did you notice anything unusual about your cousin's behavior?" Victor exhaled sharply, tossing the unlit cigarette into the fire. Clara was always a bit dreamy, you know, but lately she was jumpy, kept looking over her shoulder as if someone was watching her. I thought it was just nerves, maybe a bow gone wrong. His tone was casual, but his eyes flickered with unease. "And you, Dr. Grayson?" Sherlock asked, his gaze piercing. "As the family physician, you knew Mademoiselle Clara well. Did she confide in you?" Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his voice measured. "She came to me a fortnight ago complaining of sleeplessness. I prescribed a mild sedative, but she seemed preoccupied. She asked odd questions about poisons, their effects, how quickly they might act. I thought it mere curiosity. But now," he faltered, his face paling. Sherlock's expression remained impassive, but Hastings could see the wheels turning in his friend's mind. "And you, Madam Whitmore," Sherlock said, turning to the housekeeper, "you see all, hear all in this house. What did you observe?" Mrs. Whitmore's lips tightened, but her voice was steady. "Miss Clara was restless. I found her once, late at night, near the crimson lantern, staring at it as though it held some answer. She said nothing, but her eyes, they were afraid." Sherlock nodded, as though each answer were a thread in the tapestry he was weaving. "Bon, we have a picture. Incomplete, but intriguing. I shall examine Mademoiselle Clara's room and these letters, if they can be found. But first, a question for all of you. Where were you at precisely 11 o'clock last night?" The alibis were repeated with slight variations. Sir Reginald and Lady Beatrice by the fire, Victor at the window, Dr. Grayson in the hall, Mrs. Whitmore with
"Until I permit it, the truth, it is close, but it requires patience." As the household dispersed, Sherlock turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, we have a web of lies and half-truths. The letters, the scratch, the wax, the lantern, they are pieces of a puzzle. But the heart of it lies in Clara's mind. Her fears, her secrets. They will lead us to her killer." Hastings nodded, though his mind reeled. "Do you suspect someone already, Sherlock?" The detective's eyes gleamed. "I suspect everyone, Hastings, until the little grey cells prove otherwise. Come, let us search Clara's room. The crimson lantern, it calls to us, does it not?" As they ascended the staircase, the manor seemed to close in around them, its shadows whispering of secrets yet to be uncovered. The game, as Sherlock would say, was well and truly afoot. Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The morning light filtered through the leaded windows of Blackthorn Manor, casting a lattice of shadows across the polished floors. The house, though grand, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the scrutiny now upon it. Sherlock Holmes, with Captain Arthur Hastings at his side, moved with purposeful grace toward Clara Ashby's bedroom, a sanctum where the young woman's secrets might yet linger. The tragedy of the previous night hung heavy, and the household, though awake, moved with the sluggishness of those burdened by grief or guilt. Clara's room, situated at the end of a long corridor, was a study in delicate elegance. The walls were adorned with pale blue wallpaper, and a four-poster bed stood draped in white muslin. A small writing desk sat beneath a window overlooking the misty gardens, its surface cluttered with books, a silver hairbrush, and a single wilted rose in a crystal vase. Sherlock's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail with the precision of a watchmaker. "Order and beauty," he murmured, "yet beneath it, disorder. The mind of Mademoiselle Clara was troubled, Hastings." He began his examination at the desk, his gloved hands moving deftly.
A leather-bound journal caught his attention, its pages filled with Clara's neat, looping handwriting. Sherlock flipped through it, pausing at entries dated the past month. "Listen, mon ami," he said, reading aloud. "October 3rd. Another letter today. His words are sweet, but they frighten me. I cannot tell Mother, she would not understand." And here, October 10th. I saw the lantern again last night, glowing as if it knew my secret. I must be brave, but I am afraid. Hastings leaned closer, his brow furrowed, kneeling to inspect it. "This mark, it is not random. It aligns with the window, as though something was measured here." Next, he opened the wardrobe, where Clara's dresses hung in orderly rows. His fingers brushed a silk shawl, and he paused, extracting a small, folded piece of paper hidden within its folds. It was a letter, written in a bold, masculine hand. "My dearest Clara, the lantern burns for you alone. Meet me at midnight, and all will be revealed." It was unsigned, but a faint scent of tobacco clung to the paper. "A lover, perhaps?" Hastings ventured. "Perhaps," Sherlock replied, his tone non-committal. "But love, Hastings, is often a mask for darker motives. This tobacco, it is not common. A blend, perhaps Turkish, with a hint of spice. We must inquire who in this house indulges in such a vice." Leaving the room, Sherlock and Hastings returned to the drawing-room, where the householder waited, summoned once more by Sir Reginald. The air was thick with tension, each face a study in guarded emotion. Sherlock stood before them, his small frame radiating authority. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I have seen Mademoiselle Clara's room, and I have questions. The truth, it is like a shy bird. It must be approached with care, but it cannot hide forever." He turned first to Lady Beatrice, whose hands twisted a lace handkerchief. "Madame, you spoke of Clara's secretive nature. Did she ever mention a suitor, or letters of a romantic nature?" Lady Beatrice's eyes widened, then narrowed. "She hinted at such things, yes, but she was coy. I thought it a girlish fancy, nothing more. I should have pressed her." Her voice broke, but Sherlock's gaze remained steady. "And you, Monsieur Langley," Sherlock said, turning to Victor, who lounged against the mantelpiece, his eyes wary. "You are a man of the world. Did you know of any gentleman who held Clara's affections?" Victor's lips curled into a half-smile, though it lacked warmth. "Clara kept her own counsel, Monsieur Sherlock. If she had a beau, she didn't share it with me. But she was distracted, as I said, always glancing at that damned lantern like it was whispering to her." Sherlock's eyes gleamed. "The lantern, yes. It is most intriguing. Tell me, do any of you smoke a pipe or cigarette with a Turkish blend, perhaps mixed with a spice?" The question hung in the air, and Hastings noted the reactions. Sir Reginald's frown, Lady Beatrice's startled glance, Dr. Grayson's sudden might act. "I thought it academic curiosity, perhaps from reading too many novels. I prescribed a sedative, nothing more." "And you administered this sedative?" Sherlock pressed. "Only once, a week ago," Grayson replied. "She refused further doses." Sherlock nodded, then turned to Mrs. Whitmore, whose expression remained impassive. "Madame, you saw Clara near the lantern, late at night." Did she speak of it, or of anyone she might meet? The housekeeper's eyes met Sherlock's, unflinching. She said nothing, sir. She stood there, staring as if in a trance. I urged her to bed, but she only smiled and said the light was beautiful. Sherlock's fingers tapped lightly on his cane. Bon. Each of you has given me a piece of the puzzle, but the picture is not yet clear. I shall require access to Sir Reginald's study and these anonymous letters he mentioned. They may illuminate what the lantern conceals. Sir Reginald, pale and trembling, led Sherlock and Hastings to his study, a wood-paneled room lined with books and heavy with the scent of leather. A mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with papers. From a locked drawer, Sir Reginald produced 3 letters, each written in a different hand, their messages chillingly vague. Your sins will find you out. The lantern sees all. Beware the shadow that follows. Sherlock examined them closely, noting the paper's quality, the ink's hue. These are not the work of a tenant, he said. The paper is fine, the ink expensive. Someone within this house, or close to it, wrote these. And the mention of the lantern, it is no coincidence. As they left the study, Sherlock paused at the crimson lantern, his eyes tracing its intricate design. This lantern, Hastings, it is the heart of the mystery. A signal, a symbol, or perhaps a lure. Clara was drawn to it, and her killer used it. But why? That is what we must discover. Hastings, his mind racing, followed Sherlock back to the library, where the detective began sketching a map of the manor, marking the staircase, the lantern, and Clara's room. The alibis, Hastings, Sherlock said, his voice low. They are too neat, too rehearsed. Someone lies, and the lie is in the details, the wax, the scratch, the tobacco. We shall test them, mon ami, and the truth will emerge. As was probing their secrets. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the fireplace, observed the scene with a soldier's eye, noting the subtle signs of tension. Lady Beatrice's rigid posture, Victor Langley's restless pacing, Dr. Grayson's frequent glances at his pocket watch, and Mrs. Whitmore's unyielding vigilance from the corner of the room. The crimson lantern, still hanging in the great hall, seemed to cast its influence even here, its memory a silent accusation. Sherlock, seated in a high-backed chair, surveyed the assembled company with an air of calm authority. His small, precise hands rested on the arms of the chair, but his eyes were alive, darting from face to face as though reading an unwritten text. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice smooth but edged with steel. The death of Mademoiselle Clara Ashby is no accident. This we have established. But the path to her killer is obscured by shadows, shadows cast by those who would mislead. Let us clear the air, shall we? Constable Burrows, who had joined the gathering at Sherlock's request, shifted uncomfortably, his notebook clutched like a shield. The local police, in the form of Inspector Hargreaves, had arrived earlier that morning, a burly man with a penchant for quick conclusions. Hargreaves, standing near the door, cleared his throat. Monsieur Sherlock, with all due respect, this seems a straightforward case. The girl fell, or perhaps she was pushed in a moment of passion. My men found a letter in her room, a love letter, unsigned, but clearly from Victor Langley. His cigarettes, his handwriting, Gap style. Turkish, you said. It's enough to point the finger at him. Victor Langley's head snapped up, his face paling. Now hold on! I wrote no such letter. I smoke Turkish cigarettes, yes, but half the men in London do. You've no proof. Sherlock's eyes gleamed. No proof, Monsieur Langley. The letter was scented with tobacco, Turkish, with a hint of spice. And your alibi, it is vague. You were at the window, admiring the night, at the precise moment of Clara's death? Convenient, non? Victor's jaw tightened. I'm no murderer, Sherlock. I cared for Clara. She was my cousin, for God's sake. Caring does not preclude killing, Sherlock replied coolly. But let us examine this letter. Inspector, may I see it? Hargreaves produced the letter, sealed in a paper envelope. Sherlock examined it, his nose wrinkling slightly at the tobacco scent. He read aloud, My dearest Clara, the lantern burns for you alone. Meet me at midnight, and all will be revealed. The same letter I found in her shawl, yet you claim no knowledge of it, Monsieur Langley. It is not mine, Victor insisted, his voice rising. Held the letter to the light, his magnifying glass hovering over the bold script. It is confident, masculine, a clever imitation, perhaps? Inspector Hargreaves bristled. Imitation or not, it's evidence. Langley's the obvious suspect. He had motive, family disputes, perhaps an inheritance, and he had opportunity wandering about the hall. Hastings, standing silently, felt a pang of doubt. Victor's charm was undeniable, but his nervous demeanor and vague alibi were damning. Yet, Sherlock's calm scrutiny suggested he was not convinced. Inspector, Sherlock said, the obvious is often a distraction, a red herring, as you English say. The letter is too convenient, its placement too deliberate. Someone wishes us to look at Monsieur Langley, while the true culprit hides in plain sight. Hargreaves frowned. You're saying it's a setup? I say nothing yet, Sherlock replied, but I observe. The crimson lantern mentioned in the letter is no coincidence. It is a focal point. Clara's journal speaks of it. The anonymous letters to Sir Reginald mention it. Why? Lady Beatrice, her voice trembling, interjected. The lantern is an heirloom, nothing more. A relic of my husband's ancestor, used to signal ships. Clara was sentimental about it. Sentimental? Sherlock's tone was sharp. Or obsessed. Her journal suggests fear, not sentiment. She wrote of the lantern as if it held a secret worth killing for, perhaps. Sir Reginald, pale and drawn, spoke up. Monsieur Sherlock, those anonymous letters, they threatened exposure. I thought they referred to my business dealings, old debts, nothing criminal. But Clara, could they have been about her? Sherlock's eyes narrowed. Possible. But the letters to you and the letter to Clara are linked by the lantern. Someone used it as a symbol, a lure. We must ask, who knew of Clara's fascination with it? The room fell silent, each face a mask of guarded thoughts. Dr. Grayson cleared his throat. Clara asked me about poisons, as I said. But she also asked about the lantern, its history, its mechanism. I thought it odd, but she was curious about old things. Curious, Sherlock echoed, his fingers tapping his cane. Or seeking answers. The lantern's light was burning when she died. Was it lit by her, or by her killer? Mrs. Whitmore, who had remained silent, spoke at last. The lantern is lit every evening, sir, as tradition. I lit it myself at 8 o'clock. Sherlock's gaze fixed on her. Every evening. Yet Clara died at 11. The light was steady, not flickering. The oil was fresh, was it not? Mrs. Whitmore's composure faltered briefly. I refreshed it at 9, sir. It was running low. Sherlock nodded, his expression unreadable. Bon is all speculation, Sherlock.
Langley's letter, his cigarettes, his presence in the hall. My men are ready to arrest him. Sherlock raised a hand. Patience, Inspector. An arrest without certainty is a miscarriage of justice. Monsieur Langley may be guilty, or he may be a pawn. The wax on the stair, the scratch on the banister, the chalk mark in Clara's room, these are not explained by a love letter. We must dig deeper. Hargreaves scowled, but relented, and Sherlock turned to the household. I shall continue my inquiries. None of you shall leave this manor without my permission. The truth, it is close, but it requires precision. As the group dispersed, Hastings followed Sherlock to the library, where the detective spread out his notes and the manor's map. Victor's in trouble, isn't he? Hastings asked. Sherlock's eyes gleamed. He is the obvious choice, Hastings, and that is why I doubt him. The killer is clever, weaving a web of misdirection. The lantern, the letters, the tobacco, they are too perfect, too staged. But the killer made a mistake. The wax, the scratch, the chalk, they betray a plan. We shall find it. Hastings shivered, the weight of the mystery pressing upon him. What next, Sherlock? We examine the lantern itself, Sherlock replied, rising. Its light hides more than it reveals. Come, mon ami, let us see what secrets it holds. As they approached the great hall, the crimson lantern glowed faintly in the daylight, its glass panels shimmering like blood. Sherlock's gaze was intense, his mind already unraveling the threads of a plot that Hastings could only dimly perceive. The manor, with its secrets and shadows, seemed to tighten its grip, and the game grew ever more perilous. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The great hall of Blackthorn Manor was bathed in the soft, diffused light of late morning, the crimson lantern hanging above the staircase like a silent sentinel. Its glass panels, etched with intricate patterns, caught the sunlight and cast fractured beams across the polished floor, where Clara Ashby had met her end. Sherlock Holmes, with Captain Arthur Hastings at his side, stood beneath the lantern, his eyes narrowed as he studied its form with the intensity of a jeweler examining a rare gem. The household, still reeling from Inspector Hargreaves' accusations against Victor Langley, had retreated to their respective corners, leaving the hall to the detective's scrutiny. "Observe, Hastings," Sherlock said, his voice low but vibrant with purpose. "This lantern is no mere ornament. Its placement, its design, its constant illumination, the days of Sir Reginald's ancestor. Perhaps Clara's fixation was just imagination?" Sherlock's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Imagination, mon ami? No. The imagination of a young woman does not lead to murder. There is method here, and we shall find it in the details." With a deft movement, Sherlock climbed a small ladder provided by a reluctant footman, bringing him eye level with the lantern. He examined its base, where a small reservoir held oil, its surface shimmering with a faint iridescence. "Curieux," he murmured, dipping a gloved finger into the oil and sniffing it. "This is not common lamp oil, Hastings. It has a scent, bitter, almost medicinal. And see here." He pointed to a tiny latch, barely visible, hidden in the lantern's ornate frame. With a gentle press, the latch clicked, revealing a small compartment within the base. Hastings leaned closer, his heart quickening. "What's inside, Sherlock?" Sherlock extracted a folded piece of paper, its edges yellowed but intact. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a single line in a hurried scrawl. The lantern hides the truth, but the shadow reveals it. The note was unsigned, but the ink matched that of the anonymous letters in Sir Reginald's study. A clue, Hastings breathed. But what does it mean, and how did it get there? Sherlock's eyes gleamed. It means, mon ami, that someone in this house used the lantern as more than a light. A hiding place, perhaps, or a signal. The shadow. We must consider what it casts. He descended the ladder, tucking the note into his valise, and turned his attention to the floor below. The chalk outline of Clara's body was still visible, and Sherlock knelt beside it, his magnifying glass tracing the faint scuff mark he had noted earlier. "This mark," he said, "it is not from a shoe, nor from a fall. It is too straight, too precise. Something was placed here, a tripod perhaps, or a stand." Hastings frowned. "A stand? For what?" "For a purpose," Sherlock replied cryptically. "Come, let us revisit the staircase. The scratch and the wax, they speak to us still." They ascended the grand staircase, Sherlock's steps measured, his eyes scanning every inch. At the spot where the scratch marred the banister, he paused, running his finger along the wood. "This scratch was made by metal, Hastings. Not a knife, but something finer. A wire, perhaps. And the wax." He crouched to examine the faint smudge on the step below. It is not from a candle, but from sealing wax, red as the lantern's glass. A letter was sealed here, or opened in haste. Hastings' mind raced. A letter. Spectacles slipping down his nose.
"Monsieur Sherlock," he said, his voice unsteady, "I must speak with you. Alone, if you please." Sherlock raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Very well, Monsieur le Docteur. Hastings, remain here. Observe the hall, the lantern, the shadows. The truth is in the details." Reluctantly, Hastings stayed behind as Sherlock and Grayson retreated to a small parlor nearby. Left alone, Hastings paced the hall, his eyes drawn to the crimson lantern. Its light, though dim in the daylight, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He noticed something new, a faint shadow cast on the wall opposite, not from the lantern itself, but from something above it. Squinting, he saw a small hook embedded in the ceiling, barely noticeable. Had it always been there, or was it part of the killer's design? In the parlor, Sherlock listened as Grayson spoke in hushed tones. "Monsieur Sherlock, I fear I have not been entirely forthcoming. Clara's questions about poisons, they were not idle. She asked specifically about cyanide, its taste, its speed. I thought it morbid curiosity, but now I wonder if she suspected something." Sherlock's gaze was piercing. Suspected or feared? Did she name anyone, monsieur? Grayson shook his head. "No, but she was agitated. She mentioned the lantern, said it watched her. I thought it delirium, perhaps from lack of sleep, but now I see it was more." "And your notebook," Sherlock said, his tone sharp. "You were writing in it last night, after Clara's death. What did you record?" Grayson flinched. "Medical observations, her pulse, her pupils. I noted no signs of trauma, no wounds. But her lips, they were slightly blue. I thought it shock, but now I wonder—" "Cyanide," Sherlock finished, his voice low. "You suspected, yet you did not tell the inspector. Why?" Grayson's hands trembled. "I was not certain, and I feared for my reputation if I prescribed something that was misused." Sherlock's expression softened, but only slightly. "The truth, monsieur, does not care for reputations. You will show me this notebook, and you will speak of this to no one. Comprenez-vous?" Grayson nodded, his face ashen. Sherlock returned to the hall, where Hastings relayed his discovery of the hook. "Bien vu, Hastings," Sherlock said, climbing the ladder once more to examine the ceiling. A hook, subtle but purposeful. It could hold a wire, a thread, something to guide or conceal. The lantern's shadow, it hides and reveals. As they descended, Sherlock's mind was clearly racing, piecing together the fragments. The wax, the scratch, the hook, the note, they are part of a mechanism, Hastings. A trap produced the letters, his hands shaking. Sherlock compared them to the note from the lantern, noting the ink's consistency, the paper's texture. "These were written by different hands," he said, "but the intent is singular. Someone wished to frighten you, Sir Reginald, and to draw Clara to her doom." Sir Reginald's voice cracked. "But who, and why Clara?" Sherlock's eyes gleamed. "That, Sir Reginald, is what the little grey cells will uncover. The lantern, it is the key. Its light, its shadow, its secret compartment. They point to a mind both cunning and desperate." As they left the study, the manor seemed to close in around them, its silence heavy with unspoken truths. Hastings glanced at the crimson lantern, its glow now dimming as the afternoon waned. The clue in the wax, the scratch, the hook, they were threads in a tapestry of deception, and Sherlock Holmes was weaving them together with relentless precision. The game, Hastings knew, was far from over. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The afternoon light waned over Blackthorn Manor, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist like the secrets hidden within its walls. The crimson lantern, hanging above the grand staircase, glowed faintly, its eerie light a constant reminder of Clara Ashby's tragic end. Sherlock Holmes, with Captain Arthur Hastings at his side, moved through the manor with the quiet determination of a man who sensed the truth drawing near, yet remained elusive. The household, under the detective's unrelenting scrutiny, grew increasingly restless, their polite facades cracking under the weight of suspicion. Sherlock had requested a second gathering in the drawing room, and the air was thick with anticipation and dread. Sir Reginald sat slumped in an armchair, his face etched with grief, while Lady Beatrice clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Victor Langley, still smarting from Inspector Hargreaves' accusations, leaned against the mantelpiece, his usual bravado replaced by a sullen defensiveness. Dr. Lionel Grayson fidgeted with his spectacles, his notebook conspicuously absent, while Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore stood by the door, her expression as unreadable as ever. Inspector Hargreaves and Constable Burrows lingered near the back, the former's impatience palpable. "Mesdames et messieurs," Sherlock began, his voice clear and precise. "The threads of this mystery are beginning to weave together, but they are tangled by lies, lies of omission, lies of motive, lies of the heart. Clara Ashby was not merely a victim of circumstance. She was drawn to her death, lured by the crimson lantern and the secrets it holds. I ask you now to speak plainly, for the truth will not remain hidden." A bitter one, with Victor. It was about money, an inheritance from her grandmother. She felt he was pressuring her to influence Reginald. Victor's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "That's a lie! Clara and I never quarreled over money. Yes, we spoke of the inheritance, but it was her idea to discuss it. She wanted to help me settle some debts, said she'd talk to Uncle Reginald. I never pressured her." Sherlock's gaze was piercing. "Debts, Monsieur Langley. Of what nature?" Victor hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Gambling debts, if you must know. Nothing serious. A few £100.
Clara offered to help, but I told her to forget it. I'd manage. Sherlock's lips curved slightly. And yet the letter found in her room, scented with your Turkish tobacco, suggests a closer connection. Were you her confidant, or something more? Victor's face reddened. I told you I didn't write that letter. Someone's trying to pin this on me and I won't have it. Before Sherlock could respond, Dr. Grayson cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. Monsieur Sherlock, I too must confess. Clara, she came to me not just about poisons, but about a fear that someone in this house meant her harm. She wouldn't name them, but she said she'd seen something, the other lantern, late at night. A shadow, she called it. Sherlock's eyes narrowed. A shadow, Monsieur le Docteur? The same shadow mentioned in the note hidden within the lantern? And you did not think to mention this earlier? Grayson's hands trembled. I thought it was her imagination. She was so nervous, so fragile. I feared alarming the family without proof. Sherlock turned to Mrs. Whitmore, whose silence had been a constant presence. Madam Whitmore, you spoke of Clara staring at the lantern as if in a trance. Did you see this shadow she feared? The housekeeper's lips tightened, but her voice was steady. I saw nothing, sir. But Miss Clara was not herself. She wandered the halls at night, always near the lantern. Once I heard her whisper, "It knows." I thought it nonsense, but now... She trailed off, her eyes flicking to the others. Sherlock's fingers tapped his cane, a rhythmic counterpoint to the tension. Bon. We have a quarrel over money, a fear of a shadow, and a lantern that knows. These are not coincidences, but pieces of a puzzle. Let us consider another piece. The anonymous letters to Sir Reginald. They spoke of sins, of secrets, of the lantern. Sir Reginald, have you enemies who might wish to torment you?
Yet one purpose. Someone in this house is playing a dangerous game. Inspector Hargreaves, growing restless, interjected.
This is all very well, Sherlock, but we're wasting time. Langley's debts, his access to Clara, that letter. It's enough for an arrest. The wax, the scratch, they're incidental.
Sherlock's eyes flashed.
Incidental, Inspector? The wax on the stair, red as the lantern's glass, was sealing wax, not candle wax. The scratch on the banister was made by a wire, fine and deliberate. The hook in the ceiling above the lantern, did your men notice it? No, these are not incidental. They are the architecture of murder.
Hargreaves bristled, but Sherlock continued, undeterred.
Let us test a theory. Madam Whitmore, you lit the lantern at 8 and refreshed its oil at 9. Yet Clara died at 11, and the oil was fresh, the flame steady. Did you touch it again?
Mrs. Whitmore's composure wavered, her eyes narrowing. No, sir, I had no cause to. The lantern burns for hours on a single fill.
Curieux, Sherlock said. Then someone else tended it or tampered with it. And the note hidden within, the lantern hides the truth, but the shadow reveals it. Who placed it there, and why?
The room was silent, the weight of Sherlock's words pressing upon them. Lady Beatrice's handkerchief was now a crumpled mass, and Victor's hands clenched into fists. Dr. Grayson stared at the floor, while Mrs. Whitmore's gaze remained fixed on Sherlock, as if daring him to accuse her. Sherlock rose, his movements deliberate. I shall examine the lantern again, and I shall require Clara's journal and the letters from Sir Reginald's study. The lies they multiply, but the truth is singular. It will not elude Sherlock Holmes." As the household dispersed, Hastings followed Sherlock to the great hall, where the crimson lantern hung, its light now dim in the fading day. Sherlock climbed the ladder once more, his magnifying glass tracing the lantern's frame. "The oil," he said. "It is not merely medicinal. It is laced with something. A trace of cyanide, perhaps. Enough to cause disorientation, not death. Clara's blue lips, noted by Grayson, they suggest exposure." Hastings's eyes widened. "You think she was poisoned before she fell?" "Not fell, Hastings," Sherlock corrected. "She was led. The wire, the hook, the wax, they suggest a trap. Subtle, but deadly. The lantern was the bait, and Clara, poor Clara, was the prey." As they descended, the map casting the great hall into a realm of half-shadows, where the crimson lantern glowed with an almost sinister intensity. Its light, refracted through the etched glass, painted eerie patterns on the walls, as if the manor itself were whispering secrets. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing at the foot of the grand staircase, felt a chill that had little to do with the autumn air. The weight of Clara Ashby's death pressed upon the household, and the revelations of the day, Victor Langley's deaths, Dr. Grayson's withheld suspicions, the cryptic notes tied to the lantern, had stretched nerves to breaking. Sherlock Holmes, ever the calm center of the storm, had requested yet another gathering in the drawing room, but this time his demeanor suggested a shift. His eyes, usually so cool and analytical, held a glint of anticipation, as though he sensed a crack in the facade of the household's lies. Hastings followed him, noting the detective's precise steps, his cane tapping rhythmically as they entered the room where the suspects awaited. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Sir Reginald sat hunched, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, his eyes hollow with grief. Lady Beatrice, her composure fraying, clutched a glass of sherry, her fingers trembling. Victor Langley stood by the window, his face a mask of defiance, though his hands betrayed a nervous tremor. Dr. Lionel Grayson, his spectacles fogged with perspiration, sat rigidly, while Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, as ever, stood apart, her expression unyielding but her eyes watchful. Inspector Hargreaves and Constable Burrows lingered near the door, the former's impatience barely concealed. Sherlock took his place at the center of the room, his small frame commanding silence. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and resonant, "we stand at a crossroads in this investigation. The death of Mademoiselle Clara was no accident, no mere fall. It was a murder, calculated and cruel, woven with threads of deception, letters, shadows, and the crimson lantern itself. But tonight I sense the truth is near, for one among you is weakening under the weight of guilt." His words hung in the air, and Hastings saw the effect ripple through the room. Lady Beatrice's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor, the sherry spreading like a dark stain. She gasped, her face paling. "Monsieur Sherlock, what are you saying? That one of us killed my Clara?" Sherlock's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Madame, grief blinds, but it also reveals. You have hidden something, have you not? A truth about Clara, about her fears?" Lady Beatrice's lips trembled, and for the first time her polished exterior crumbled. She sank into a chair, her voice breaking. I knew she was afraid. She came to me a week ago in tears. She said she'd found something terrible in her father's study. Papers, she called.
Wouldn't say more, only that they changed everything. I begged her to tell me, but she refused. She said it was too dangerous, that the lantern would reveal it all. Sherlock's eyes gleamed. "Papers, madame, and you did not think to mention this before?"
I was protecting her, Lady Beatrice cried, her voice rising. She was my daughter! I thought it was a childish fancy, a misunderstanding. But now— She buried her face in her hands, her sobs filling the room. Sir Reginald rose, his face ashen. Beatrice, what are you saying? What papers? I keep nothing in my study but accounts, old letters, nothing that could harm Clara. Sherlock turned to him, his voice sharp. Nothing, Sir Reginald? Yet the anonymous letters you received spoke of sins, of secrets. And Clara, she found something in your study, something that cost her life. What was it? Sir Reginald's hands shook, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know. There are old contracts, debts from years ago, but nothing sinister. I swear it. Sherlock's gaze shifted to Victor Langley, who had grown pale during the exchange. Monsieur Langley, you spoke of debts, of Clara's offer to help. Did she mention these papers? Did she seek your aid? Victor's eyes darted to the others, his voice strained. She said nothing about papers. Yes, we talked about money, but it was casual. She was worried about something, but she wouldn't tell me what. Kept muttering about the lantern, like it was alive. Sherlock's fingers tapped his cane. The lantern, always the lantern. And you, Monsieur le Docteur, he said, turning to Grayson. You noted Clara's blue lips, a sign of cyanide. Yet you withheld this, fearing for your reputation. Did you also know of these papers? Grayson's spectacles slipped, and he caught them clumsily. I swear I knew nothing of papers. Clara asked about poisons, about the lantern's history, but she was vague. I thought her unwell, perhaps delusional. I should have acted, but I didn't. Sherlock's gaze then fell on Mrs. Whitmore, whose silence had been a constant thread through the investigation. Madame Whitmore, you see all in this house. Did you see Clara in the study, searching for these papers? The housekeeper's eyes met Sherlock's, unflinching. I saw her once, late at night, leaving the study. She was pale, clutching a key. I asked what she was doing, and she said only, looking for the truth. I thought it her grief, her father's troubles. I was wrong. The room was silent, the weight of these confessions pressing upon all. Sherlock stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. But who set this trap? Who knew of the papers? Lady Beatrice's sobs quieted, and she looked up, her eyes wide with realization. It was me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Not the murder. I could never harm my child. But I told someone about the papers. I told Victor. Victor's head snapped toward her, his face a mask of shock. Beatrice, what are you saying? I never— You did, she cried, rising. I told you Clara was troubled, that she'd found something in the study. You said you'd talk to her, calm her fears, but then she died. Victor staggered back, his hands raised. I swear, I only spoke to her to reassure her. I told her to leave it alone, that it wasn't worth upsetting the family. I didn't kill her. Sherlock's eyes gleamed with intensity. The truth. It breaks through at last. Madame Beatrice, you have given us a key. Monsieur Langley, your conversation with Clara. When was it? 2 nights ago, Victor admitted, his voice hoarse. In the library. She was frantic, said she'd found proof of something terrible. I told her to let it go, that it would only cause pain. Sherlock nodded, his mind racing. Bon. The papers, the lantern, the cyanide. They converge. But the killer's hand is not yet revealed. We must find these papers, and we must test the lantern's oil. The truth, it is close. As the household dispersed, shaken by Lady Beatrice's outburst, Sherlock led Hastings to the study. "The emotional turning point, Hastings," he said softly. "It reveals the heart, but also the lie. Someone used Clara's discovery, her fear, to silence her. The papers, they are the motive, and the lantern is the method." In the study, Sherlock searched the locked drawer Lady Beatrice had mentioned, finding only old contracts and a faded photograph of a young Sir Reginald with a woman, not Lady Beatrice. "Curieux," Sherlock murmured. "Another thread, Hastings. The past. It haunts this house." As they left the study, the crimson lantern's glow seemed to pulse, a silent witness to the unraveling secrets. The truth was near, but the shadows of Blackthorn Manor were deep, and Sherlock Holmes knew the game was far from won. Chapter 9. The Trap. The evening shadows deepened within Blackthorn Manor, cloaking the great hall in a somber twilight that seemed to mirror the growing unease of its inhabitants. The crimson lantern, ever present above the grand staircase, cast its haunting glow, its light flickering as though whispering secrets only it could comprehend. Sherlock Holmes, with Captain Arthur Hastings at his side, stood in the hall, his eyes fixed on the lantern with an intensity that suggested he was close to unraveling its mystery. The revelations of the afternoon, Lady Beatrice's confession about Clara's discovery of papers, Victor Langley's heated denial, and the mounting evidence of a calculated murder had set the stage for a decisive move. Sherlock, his small frame taut with purpose, turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, the time has come to spring the trap. The killer, they are clever, but they cannot resist the lure of their own design. The crimson lantern. It is not merely a symbol, but a stage. Tonight, we shall use it to draw them out." Hastings, his soldier's instincts sharpened by the tension, frowned. "A trap, Sherlock? You mean to provoke the killer? But how?" Sherlock's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "By exploiting their vanity, Hastings. The killer believes they have outwitted us all. The police, the household, even Sherlock Holmes. But vanity is a weakness, and we shall exploit it. Gather the household in the great hall at 9 o'clock. Tell them I have uncovered the truth and will reveal it under the lantern's light." Hastings hesitated, a chill running through him. "But Sherlock, what if the killer strikes again? This is dangerous." "Danger, mon ami, is the crucible of truth," Sherlock replied. "The little gray cells, they are prepared. Now go." As Hastings moved to summon the household, Sherlock returned to the lantern. Climbing the ladder with the agility of a cat, he examined the hidden compartment once more, his fingers tracing the edges where the note, "The lantern hides the truth, but the shadow reveals it," had been found. He then inspected the oil reservoir, extracting a small sample with a glass vial. "Cyanide, subtle but present," he murmured. "Enough to disorient, to weaken, but not to kill outright." The fall was the true weapon, but the lantern set the scene. By 9 o'clock, the great hall was filled with the household, their faces a mixture of dread and anticipation. Sir Reginald stood with Lady Beatrice, her arm looped through his, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. Victor Langley leaned against a pillar, his usual nonchalance replaced by a wary alertness. Dr. Lionel Grayson clutched his medical bag, his spectacles glinting in the lantern's light. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore stood at the edge, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on Sherlock as though measuring him. Inspector Hargreaves and Constable Burrows flanked the group.
Scowl. Sherlock stood beneath the lantern, its crimson glow casting his features into sharp relief. "Madame and Monsieur," he began, his voice resonant and commanding. "Tonight, We stand at the heart of Blackthorn Manor's tragedy. Clara Ashby was murdered, not by a fall, but by a mind both cunning and cruel. The Crimson Lantern, this relic of your family's past, was the instrument of her doom. It was no accident, but a trap, baited with promises and poisoned with deceit. A murmur rippled through the group, and Lady Beatrice's hand tightened on Sir Reginald's arm. Sherlock continued, his eyes scanning each face. The clues are clear. The sealing wax on the stair, red as the lantern's glass. The scratch on the banister, made by a fine wire. The hook in the ceiling, a silent conspirator. And the oil, laced with cyanide to cloud Clara's mind. But the most telling clue is the note, hidden within the lantern. The lantern hides the truth, but the shadow reveals it. Who placed it there, and why? Victor Langley stepped forward, his voice sharp. You're accusing me again, aren't you? That letter in Clara's room wasn't mine. I swear it. Someone's framing me. Sherlock's gaze was unflinching. Framing, Monsieur Langley? Possible. But your debts, your Turkish tobacco, your conversation with Clara about her discovery, they paint a picture. Yet I wonder, is the picture too perfect? He turned to Dr. Grayson, whose hands trembled on his bag. Monsieur le Docteur, you noted Clara's blue lips, a sign of cyanide, yet you hesitated to speak. Why? Were you protecting yourself or another? Grayson's voice was hoarse. I feared I'd failed her. If I'd recognized the sign sooner, I might have saved her. But I swear, I had no part in this. Sherlock nodded, then turned to Mrs. Whitmore. Madame, you lit the lantern. You tended its oil. Yet the cyanide was added after your last check at 9. Did you see anyone near the lantern that night? Mrs. Whitmore's eyes narrowed, but her voice was steady. No, sir. I was in the kitchen after 9, preparing tea. The hall was empty when I left. Sherlock's fingers tapped his cane, a rhythmic counterpoint to the silence. Empty, you say? Yet someone tampered with the lantern. Someone set the wire, the hook, the wax. Someone lured Clara to the staircase with a promise. A letter, perhaps, or a whisper of truth. He stepped closer to the lantern, distorted by the hook above. Sherlock pointed to it, his voice steady. The shadow reveals. Look closely, mes amis. The hook. It alters the pattern. A wire stretched from the hook to the banister would have been invisible in this light until Clara, disoriented by cyanide, stumbled into it. A gasp escaped Lady Beatrice, and Sir Reginald's face paled. Sherlock continued, relentless. The wire tripped her, the wax marked her path, the cyanide ensured her weakness. But who set this trap? Who knew Clara would come to the lantern at midnight? The silence was deafening, broken only by a sudden sob from Lady Beatrice. It was me, she cried, collapsing to her knees. Not the murder, but I told her to meet someone that night. A note came, slipped under my door saying Clara must go to the lantern at midnight to learn the truth about the papers. I thought it was a suitor, a resolution. I gave her the note. Sherlock's eyes softened, but his voice was firm. And who gave you this note, madam? I don't know, she wailed. It was unsigned, like the others. I thought it would help her. Sherlock turned to the group, his gaze piercing. The killer is here, listening. They used Lady Beatrice's love for her daughter, Clara's curiosity, the lantern's mystique. But they have miscalculated. The shadow has spoken, and Sherlock Holmes has heard. As the lights were restored, the household stood frozen, each face a mask of fear or guilt. The trap had been set, and the killer, Sherlock knew, was teetering on the edge of exposure. The crimson lantern glowed on, its light a beacon in the darkness of Blackthorn Manor's secrets. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The great hall of Blackthorn Manor was a theatre of shadows, the crimson lantern casting its eerie glow over the assembled household, their faces illuminated by flickers of fear, guilt, and anticipation. The air was thick with the weight of impending revelation, the silence broken only by the faint creak of the manor's ancient timbers. Sherlock Holmes stood beneath the lantern, his small, precise figure commanding the room, his eyes gleaming with the certainty of a man who had unraveled the threads of a complex tapestry. Captain Arthur Hastings at his side felt his heart pound, sensing that the climax of this grim drama was at hand. "Mesdames et messieurs," Sherlock began, his voice resonant and deliberate. "We have reached the moment of truth. Clara Ashby's death was no accident, no mere fall, but a murder most cunning, orchestrated with precision and cloaked in misdirection." The crimson
Grayson clutching his medical bag as if it were a shield, and Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, her expression as inscrutable as ever. Inspector Hargreaves and Constable Burrows flanked the group, the former's skepticism now tinged with curiosity. Sherlock raised a hand, his cane glinting in the lantern's light. "Let us reconstruct the crime, step by step, for the truth lies in the details. Clara Ashby was lured to the staircase at midnight, drawn by a note promising answers about papers she had found, papers that threatened someone in this house. The lantern's oil, laced with cyanide, disoriented her, clouding her mind. A wire, stretched from the hook in the ceiling to the banister, tripped her, ensuring her fall. The sealing wax on the stair marked her path. The scratch on the banister betrayed the wire's presence. But who devised this trap? Who knew Clara's fears, her secrets, and used them against her? He turned to Lady Beatrice, whose hands trembled. "Madam, you gave Clara the note that sent her to her death, believing it a resolution to her troubles, but you were a pawn, manipulated by the true killer." Lady Beatrice's voice was a whisper. "I swear I didn't know. The note was slipped under my door, unsigned like the others." Sherlock nodded, his gaze shifting to Victor Langley. "Monsieur Langley, you were the obvious suspect, the Turkish tobacco, the debts, your conversation with Clara about her discovery. But the letter in her room was too perfect, too staged. You are not the killer, but you are not innocent. You knew of her fears and did nothing." Victor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his eyes flickering with guilt. Sherlock continued, turning to Dr. Grayson. "Monsieur le Docteur, your hesitation to report the cyanide, your notes on Clara's blue lips, they suggest fear, not guilt. You suspected poison, but feared for your reputation. You too are not the killer." Grayson exhaled, his shoulders sagging, but Sherlock's gaze had already moved to Sir Reginald. "Sir Reginald, the anonymous letters spoke of your sins, your secrets. Clara found papers in your study, papers that changed her. What were they?" Sir Reginald's voice cracked. I told you, they were old contracts, debts from years ago. Nothing worth killing for." Sherlock's eyes narrowed. "Nothing? Yet the photograph in your drawer, a woman, not Lady Beatrice, suggests a past not fully buried. Clara found it, did she not? And with it, papers that revealed a secret you wished to keep hidden." Sir Reginald paled, his hands shaking. It was a youthful indiscretion long past, a woman I loved before Beatrice who bore me a child I supported in secret. Clara found the letters, the payments. She thought I was hiding a scandal, but it was only
To the lantern. And that brings us to the final player. He turned to Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, whose composure remained unbroken, though her eyes gleamed with a faint defiance. Madame Whitmore, you have been the shadow in this house, watching, listening, tending the lantern. You lit it each night, refreshed its oil, yet you claim no one tampered with it after 9. But the cyanide was added later, and the note in the lantern's compartment. The lantern hides the truth, but the shadow reveals it, was in your hand. A gasp rippled through the room, and Mrs. Whitmore's lips tightened. You accuse me, Monsieur Sherlock? I am a housekeeper, nothing more. I had no reason to harm Miss Clara. No reason? Sherlock's voice was sharp. Let us consider the truth. You are not merely a housekeeper, madame. You are Ellen Carver, the woman from Sir Reginald's past, the mother of his secret child. Clara found the papers, letters, payments, proof of your daughter, now grown and living abroad. You feared exposure, not for Sir Reginald, but for yourself. Your position, your pride, your carefully constructed life, all threatened by Clara's discovery. Mrs. Whitmore's face paled, but she stood her ground. You have no proof. Oh, but I do, Sherlock said, producing the note from the lantern. This note, written in your hand, matches the anonymous letters to Sir Reginald. The sealing wax on the stair. Your wax, used to seal household correspondence. The wire, the hook, the cyanide, all placed by you, madame, to silence Clara before she could reveal your secret. You lured her with a note, slipped under Lady Beatrice's door, knowing she would send Clara to the lantern. The cyanide in the oil weakened her. The wire tripped her, and the fall ensured her silence. Mrs. Whitmore's composure cracked at last, her voice trembling. She was going to ruin everything. I begged her to let it go, but she wouldn't listen. She said the truth must come out, that it was her duty. I only meant to frighten her, to make her stop. The cyanide was a warning, not a killer. I didn't mean for her to die. The room erupted in chaos. Lady Beatrice's cry, Sir Reginald's stunned silence, Victor's muttered curse. Inspector Hargreaves stepped forward, his voice gruff. Mrs. Whitmore, you're under arrest for the murder of Clara Ashby. Sherlock raised a hand. One moment, Inspector. Madame Whitmore, your confession is incomplete. The wire was meant to trip, not kill, but the cyanide was your mistake. You underestimated its potency, and Clara's fall stood in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation settling over them. The crimson lantern glowed on, its light no longer a mystery, but a testament to the tragedy it had concealed. Hastings, his heart heavy, turned to Sherlock. You knew, didn't you, from the start? Sherlock's eyes softened. Not from the start, mon ami. But the little grey cells, they see what others miss. The lantern, the letters, the shadows. They spoke, and I listened. The hall fell silent. The crimson lantern's glow fading as the night deepened, its secrets laid bare at last. The reflection. The great hall of Blackthorn Manor was shrouded in the quiet of late evening. The crimson lantern now dimmed, its once menacing glow reduced to a faint ember, as if in deference to the truth it had helped unveil. The air, heavy with the aftermath of Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore's confession, seemed to carry the weight of a house unburdened, yet forever scarred. Captain Arthur Hastings stood by the grand staircase, his gaze lingering on the spot where Clara Ashby had fallen, his heart a tumult of relief and sorrow. The mystery was solved, the killer revealed, but the cost was a wound that would linger in Blackthorn's halls. Sherlock Holmes, his work complete, stood apart, his small, precise figure silhouetted against the dying firelight in the drawing-room, where he had retreated with Hastings after Mrs. Whitmore's arrest. The household, shaken by the revelation, had dispersed, Sir Reginald to his study, Lady Beatrice to her chambers, Victor Langley to the solitude of the garden, and Dr. Lionel Grayson to his medical duties, attending to the shocked and grieving. Inspector Hargreaves and Constable Burrows had taken Mrs. Whitmore to the village station, her confession echoing in their ears as they departed. Hastings, his soldier's composure tested by the day's events, turned to his friend. "Sherlock, it's over, isn't it? You've done it again. Unraveled the impossible. But how did you know it was Mrs. Whitmore? The clues, they pointed everywhere." Sherlock's lips curved into a faint, reflective smile as he adjusted his cuffs with meticulous care. "Mon ami, the clues, they always point to the truth, but only if one listens with the little grey cells. The crimson lantern was a key, not merely a light, but a symbol of secrets, a beacon for Clara's fears, and a trap set by a desperate mind. Mrs. Whitmore's hand was revealed in the details, the sealing wax, the wire, the note in her script. But it was her silence, her watchfulness, that betrayed her most. Fragile foundation of anonymity. Clara's discovery of the papers, proof of Sir Reginald's youthful indiscretion and the child it produced, threatened to shatter that foundation. The anonymous letters to Sir Reginald, the note to Clara, the cyanide in the lantern's oil, they were her desperate attempts to silence the truth. Hastings shook his head, his mind replaying the events. But the cyanide? She said it was only to frighten Clara, not to kill her. Was that true? Sherlock's eyes gleamed with a trace of melancholy. "It is likely, Hastings. The dose was small, meant to disorient, to make Clara vulnerable to the wire that tripped her. But desperation clouds judgment, and the fall was fatal. Mrs. Whitmore's tragedy is that her love for her daughter drove her to destroy another. The human heart, it is a complex puzzle, n'est-ce pas?" Hastings nodded, his thoughts turning to Clara. Poor Clara. She was so young, so curious. If only she'd confided in someone sooner. Sherlock's gaze softened. "Curiosity, mon ami, is both a gift and a curse. Clara sought the truth, and it led her to the lantern. But the truth, it always finds a way, even through the darkest shadows." He rose, pacing slowly, his cane tapping lightly on the floor. "Consider the method, Hastings. The lantern, with its hidden compartment, was a perfect tool, a relic of tradition, yet a vessel for deceit. The wire, stretched from the hook to the banister, was invisible in the crimson light. The sealing wax marked the path, ensuring Clara's foot would find the trap. The note, "The lantern hides the truth, but the shadow reveals it," was Mrs. Whitmore's fatal error. She could not resist the flourish, the poetic hint of her own cleverness. Vanity, it is the downfall of many a criminal. Hastings leaned forward, his voice low. "And the papers, the photograph in Sir Reginald's study, they confirmed your suspicions, didn't they?" "Oui," Sherlock replied, stopping by the window to gaze into the darkened garden. "The photograph of Ellen Carver, the letters detailing payments to a child abroad, they were the motive. Clara, in her innocence, uncovered a secret that Mrs. Whitmore had guarded for decades. The anonymous letters to Sir Reginald were meant to frighten him into silence, to keep him from probing too deeply. But Clara, she was too curious, too determined. She had to be stopped. Hastings sighed, the weight of the tragedy settling over him. "It's a grim business, Sherlock. Sir Reginald and Lady Beatrice, they'll never recover from this." Sherlock turned, his expression thoughtful. "Grief, Hastings, is a shadow that lingers, but life continues. They will mourn, but they will endure. As for Victor Langley and Dr. Grayson, their secrets, debts, hesitations are but footnotes in this tale. The true tragedy lies in the collision of love and fear, of loyalty and betrayal." He paused, his eyes.
Crimson Lantern had fascinated me, Hastings. Not for its beauty, but for its role as a silent conspirator. It illuminated the truth, even as it hid it. Such is the nature of mystery, light and shadow, intertwined. Hastings smiled faintly. "You sound almost philosophical, Sherlock." Sherlock's lips twitched. "Philosophy, mon ami, is merely the recognition of order in chaos. The little grey cells, they seek order, and in this case, they have found it." As the fire dwindled, Sherlock gathered his valise, his movements precise and deliberate. "Come, Hastings, our work here is done. The train to London awaits, and there are other puzzles, other shadows, to unravel." They stepped into the hall where the crimson lantern hung, now unlit, its glass panels dull in the moonlight. The manor seemed quieter, as if relieved of its burden, yet the echoes of Clara's death lingered in the air. Sherlock paused, his gaze lingering on the lantern. "A beautiful thing," he murmured. "Yet beauty, like truth, can conceal great darkness." With a final nod to the silent hall, Sherlock and Hastings stepped into the night, the mist curling around them like a shroud. The game was over, the truth revealed, but the memory of Blackthorn Manor and its crimson lantern would linger, a testament to the relentless pursuit of Sherlock Holmes's little grey cells. Chapter 12. The Echoes of Truth. The morning after Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore's confession dawned cold and grey over Blackthorn Manor, the mist clinging to the estate like a lingering ghost. The crimson lantern, now extinguished, hung silently above the grand staircase, its once ominous glow reduced to a dull reflection of the overcast sky, filtering through the tall windows. The household, though relieved of the mystery's weight, moved with the heavy tread of those grappling with betrayal and loss. Captain Arthur Hastings, preparing to depart with Sherlock Holmes, felt the manor's oppressive air, as if its walls still whispered of the tragedy that had unfolded. Sherlock, impeccable as ever in his neatly pressed suit, stood in the great hall, his valise at his side, his eyes scanning the space one final time. His calm demeanor belied the intensity of the previous night's revelation, but Hastings knew his friend's mind was still at work, tying up the final threads of the case. "Sherlock," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "it's truly over, isn't it? Mrs. Whitmore's confession. It explains everything, yet I can't help feeling there's more to this." Sherlock's lips curved into a faint smile, his gaze lingering on the lantern. "Mon ami, the case is solved, the killer revealed, but the human heart, it leaves echoes. The truth we have uncovered is complete, yet it resonates with questions of motive, of pain, that linger beyond the law's reach." They were interrupted by the approach of Sir Reginald, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow with the weight of his daughter's
Death, and the revelation of his past. "Monsieur Sherlock," he said, his voice low and strained, "I owe you a debt I can never repay. You have brought justice for Clara, but at what cost? My household, my secrets, they are laid bare." Sherlock inclined his head, his expression one of quiet sympathy. "Sir Reginald, justice is a cold comfort, but it is necessary. Clara sought the truth, and in her death, she ensured it would be found. Your secrets, they were the catalyst, but not the crime. You must forgive yourself, if you can. Sir Reginald's hands trembled as he gripped his cane. Ellen, Mrs. Whitmore. I never suspected. She served us for years, hid her past so well. To think she bore my child, and I never knew until Clara found those papers. Sherlock's voice was gentle but firm. The past, Sir Reginald, is a shadow that follows us all. Mrs. Whitmore's love for her daughter drove her to desperation, but her actions were her own. You must rebuild, for Lady Beatrice, for yourself. As Sir Reginald nodded, his shoulders sagging, Lady Beatrice appeared, her face pale but composed. She approached Sherlock, her hands clasped tightly. Monsieur Sherlock, I cannot thank you enough. Yet I curse myself for my blindness. I gave Clara that note, sent her to her death. How can I live with that? Sherlock's eyes softened. Madame, you acted as a mother, trusting in love. The killer used that trust, but the fault is not yours. Clara's memory will endure in your strength. Lady Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, drawing herself up with a dignity born of resolve. We will honor her, Monsieur Sherlock. Thank you. As they spoke, Victor Langley entered the hall, his usual swagger subdued. He approached Sherlock, his voice low. I'm not proud of my part in this, Sherlock. My debts, my silence about Clara's fears. I should have done more. But I swear, I had no hand in her death. Sherlock regarded him coolly. Monsieur Langley, your sins are those of omission, not commission. You are free of murder, but not of responsibility. Use this chance to mend your ways. Victor nodded, his jaw tight, and turned away, his steps heavy with unspoken regret. Dr. Lionel Grayson lingered at the edge of the hall, his medical bag in hand. Monsieur Sherlock, he said.
Missed it entirely. Sherlock's smile was faint. The lantern, Inspector, was the killer's mistake. Its light revealed what they sought to hide. You will ensure Mrs. Whitmore faces justice? Hargreaves nodded. She's confessed fully. The evidence, the note, the wax, the cyanide, it's all there. She'll face trial. As they stepped outside, the mist parted briefly, revealing the rolling fields beyond Blackthorn Manor. Hastings glanced back at the lantern, now a mere silhouette in the hall. Sherlock, do you ever wonder about the lives we touch? Clara's death, Mrs. Whitmore's secret. It's all so tragic. Sherlock paused, his cane tapping lightly on the gravel path. Tragedy, Hastings, is the shadow cast by human choice. We cannot undo it, but we can bring order to chaos. The little grey cells, they find the truth, and in that, there is purpose. They climbed into the waiting motor car, the manor receding into the mist as they drove towards the village station. Hastings, his mind still turning over the case, asked, What was it about the lantern, Sherlock? Why did it fascinate you so? Sherlock's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. The lantern, mon ami, was a paradox, a beacon of light that hid darkness. It was tradition, beauty, and treachery in one. Clara saw it as a symbol of truth, Mrs. Whitmore as a tool of deception. In its glow I saw the human soul, with all its contradictions. The car rumbled on, carrying them towards London and new mysteries. Blackthorn Manor faded into the distance, its crimson lantern a silent witness to a tragedy resolved but never forgotten. Sherlock Holmes, his mind already turning to the next puzzle,
sat in quiet contemplation, his little grey cells ever vigilant in the pursuit of truth. Chapter 13. The Lingering Shadows. The train to London rattled through the misty countryside, its rhythmic clatter a stark contrast to the heavy silence that hung between Sherlock Holmes and Captain Arthur Hastings. The events at Blackthorn Manor, though resolved, left an indelible mark on Hastings' mind, the image of the crimson lantern burning in his memory like a beacon of both truth and tragedy. Sherlock, seated opposite, gazed out the window, his sharp features softened by the dim light of the carriage. His hands, usually so restless with purpose, rested quietly on his cane, but Hastings knew his friend's mind was far from idle. "Sherlock," Hastings ventured, breaking the silence, "you've solved the case, brought justice for Clara, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this. Mrs. Whitmore's confession, it was so complete, yet the manner, it feels unfinished, as if it's still hiding something." Sherlock's eyes flicked to Hastings, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Mon ami,
In the echoes of human frailty, the little grey cells, they see not only the crime, but the ripples it leaves behind." Hastings leaned forward, his voice low. "Ripples? You mean the family? Sir Reginald, Lady Beatrice, Victor? Broken, Sherlock. How do they go on after this?" Sherlock's gaze returned to the window, where the mist swirled past like a spectral tide. "They go on, Hastings, as all must, by facing the truth, however painful. Sir Reginald's secret child, Lady Beatrice's unwitting role, Victor's debts, Grayson's hesitation, these are wounds, but wounds heal, given time and courage. The manor itself, it is a monument to their past, but it need not define their future." The train's whistle sounded, a mournful note that seemed to echo Hastings's thoughts. He shifted, his mind returning to the crimson lantern. "That lantern, Sherlock, it was more than a trap, wasn't it? It was personal for Mrs. Whitmore. Why did she fixate on it?" Sherlock's fingers tapped lightly on his cane, a familiar sign of his mind at work. "The lantern, mon ami, was her confession. As Ellen Carver, she lived in the shadow of her past, serving the family that tied her to Sir Reginald's indiscretion. The lantern, a symbol of the Ashby legacy, was her silent rebellion, a way to wield power over those who held her secret. By using it to lure Clara, she turned their tradition against them, a poetic act of vengeance, though she claimed it was only fear." Hastings frowned, piecing it together. "So, the note in the lantern hides the truth, but the shadow reveals it. That was her way of admitting her guilt?" "Précisément," Sherlock said, his eyes gleaming. "The criminal mind, it craves recognition, even in secrecy. Mrs. Whitmore could not resist leaving her mark, a riddle for those clever enough to solve it. She underestimated Sherlock Holmes, but the lantern, it spoke to me from the moment I saw it." The carriage swayed, and Hastings glanced at the other passengers, their faces blurred in the dim light, oblivious to the weight of the conversation. "And the cyanide," he said, "you're certain it was meant only to disorient, not to kill?" Sherlock nodded. "The dose was small, Hastings, carefully measured. Mrs. Whitmore's intent was to frighten Clara, to make her stumble into the wire, perhaps to injure her enough to silence her questions about the papers. But the fall was miscalculated, the cyanide's effect stronger than she anticipated. It is a lesson, mon ami. Even the most meticulous plan can unravel in the face of chance." "Found,"
The papers, the photograph, they would have remained hidden without her curiosity. We honor her by ensuring her sacrifice was not in vain. The train slowed as it approached a small station, the platform shrouded in mist. Sherlock rose, adjusting his coat with his usual precision. "Come, Hastings, London awaits. And with it, new puzzles. But first I must ask, have you observed anything in the manor I may have missed?" Hastings blinked, caught off guard. "Me? Sherlock, you see everything, but—" "There was one thing. In Clara's room, the wilted rose in the vase, it seemed out of place, as if it meant something. I didn't mention it before, but it struck me as odd." Sherlock's eyes lit with interest. "A rose, you say? Wilted, yet preserved in crystal. A symbol, perhaps, of love or loss. It may be nothing, Hastings, but it is a detail worth noting. The heart, it speaks in such small ways." As they stepped onto the platform, the cold air stung Hastings' face, grounding him in the moment. The manor, the lantern, the tragedy. They receded into the mist, but their echoes followed. "What now, Sherlock?" he asked, pulling his coat tighter. Sherlock's gaze was distant, his mind already turning to the future. "Now, mon ami, we return to the world, where mysteries await. The Crimson Lantern is behind us, but its lesson remains. The truth, it is always there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the light of reason to reveal it." They boarded the connecting train, the countryside fading into the dusk. Blackthorn Manor was a memory now, its secrets laid bare. But Hastings knew that Sherlock Holmes would carry its lessons forward, his little grey cells ever ready for the next challenge. The game, as always, would go on. Chapter 14. The Weight of Memory. The London-bound train rattled through the dusk, its wheels clattering a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the relentless march of truth uncovered at Blackthorn Manor. The countryside, cloaked in mist, slipped past the windows, a blur of shadows that mirrored the lingering unease in Captain Arthur Hastings's heart. Across from him, Sherlock Holmes sat in quiet contemplation, his sharp features softened by the dim light of the carriage. His hands, usually so animated with purpose, rested calmly on his cane, but his eyes gleamed with the restless energy of a mind still sifting through the details of the case. Hastings, unable to shake the weight of Clara Ashby's death and Mrs. Whitmore's confession, broke the silence. "Sherlock, we've left Blackthorn Manor behind, but it feels incomplete. The lantern, the papers, the tragedy, it's all so clear now, yet I can't help but wonder about the family. How do they move forward with such betrayal in their midst?"
Pain. The Ashby family will carry the scars of this affair, but they are not without resilience. Sir Reginald's shame, Lady Beatrice's guilt, Victor's regrets, they are threads in the tapestry of life, and they will weave a new pattern, given time. Hastings leaned back, his thoughts drifting to the Crimson Lantern, its glow now a memory, but its significance indelible. That lantern, Sherlock. It was more than a tool for murder. It was a symbol, wasn't it? For Clara, for Mrs. Whitmore, for the whole house. "Précisément," Sherlock replied, his voice low and thoughtful. The lantern was a paradox, a beacon of tradition that hid treachery. For Clara, it was a mystery, a puzzle, tied to the papers she found. For Mrs. Whitmore, it was a weapon, a way to protect a secret by turning the Ashby legacy against itself. And for me, it was the key to the truth, its light revealing the shadows of deceit. Hastings frowned, his mind returning to a detail that had nagged at him. "You mentioned the wilted rose in Clara's room, Sherlock. I brought it up on the platform, And you said it might be a symbol. Could it have meant something more, something we missed? Sherlock's eyes lit with interest, his fingers tapping his cane. The rose, Hastings. Bien vu. It was a small detail, yet significant. A wilted rose in a crystal vase, preserved despite its decay. It suggests sentiment, perhaps a token from someone Clara loved or feared. It may have been a gift from the writer of the love letter, the one scented with Turkish tobacco. But it's wilting. That speaks of a relationship soured or a hope betrayed. Do you think it was from Victor? Hastings asked, his brow furrowing. He denied writing the letter. But the tobacco? Sherlock shook his head. Victor Langley is a man of charm and flaws, but not the killer. The letter was a forgery. Its tobacco a deliberate misdirection to point suspicion at him. The rose, however, it may have been from Mrs. Whitmore herself, a subtle gesture to Clara, perhaps to soften her suspicions about the papers, a mother's instinct, even in deceit. Hastings' eyes widened. You mean Mrs. Whitmore gave Clara the rose to… what? Gain her trust? Possibly, Sherlock said, his tone measured. Or to assuage her own guilt. The human heart, Hastings, is a labyrinth. Mrs. Whitmore's actions were driven by love for her secret daughter, but love can twist into desperation. The rose, like the lantern, was a symbol of her conflicted soul. The train slowed as it approached a junction, the platform lights casting fleeting both a gift and a burden. They see the order in chaos, the truth in lies. They cannot unsee the suffering. Yet it is my purpose to bring clarity, to restore balance. At Blackthorn Manor, we did so for Clara, for justice. That is enough. Hastings nodded, though his heart remained heavy. And what of Mrs. Whitmore? She'll face trial, but her daughter, the one she protected, would she ever know the truth? Sherlock's lips tightened. That is a shadow beyond our reach, Hastings. The law will deal with Mrs. Whitmore, but her daughter's fate is another story. One we cannot write. We have done our part. The rest belongs to time. The train lurched forward, carrying them closer to London. Hastings glanced out the window, the mist now a silver veil in the moonlight. It's strange, Sherlock. I thought solving the case would bring peace, but it feels hollow. Clara's gone, the family's broken, and Mrs. Whitmore's life is ruined. Sherlock's voice was soft but firm. Peace, Hastings, is not the absence of pain, but the presence of truth. We have given Blackthorn Manor that gift, however bitter. The Crimson Lantern's secrets are laid bare, and the family, though wounded, can begin to heal. As the train rolled on, Hastings felt the weight of the case begin to lift, though its echoes lingered. The Crimson Lantern, the papers, the rose, they were fragments of a tragedy that Sherlock Holmes had pieced together with relentless precision. Yet the human cost, the ripples of grief and betrayal, would remain long after they left the manor behind. Sherlock, sensing his friend's mood, offered a rare gesture, a brief pat on Hastings' shoulder. Rest, mon ami. London awaits, and with it, new challenges. The past is a lesson, not a chain. Hastings smiled faintly, comforted by the words. The train carried them into the night, the memory of Blackthorn Manor fading into the mist, but its lessons, like the glow of the Crimson Lantern, would linger in the quiet corners of their minds. Chapter 15. The Final Light. The London train emerged from the misty countryside into the glow of the city's outskirts, its lights a stark contrast to the shrouded gloom of Blackthorn Manor. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated across from Sherlock Holmes, felt the weight of the case settle into a quiet ache. The resolution of Clara Ashby's murder, leaving behind a tapestry of sorrow and truth. Sherlock, his sharp profile framed against the carriage window, seemed lost in thought, his fingers resting lightly on his cane, though his eyes betrayed the restless energy of a mind still tracing the edges of the mystery. The carriage was quiet, the other passengers absorbed in their own worlds, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in the distant manor. Hastings feel unsettled. Is this how it always ends, with justice but no peace? Sherlock turned, his gaze piercing, yet softened by a rare trace of empathy.
Mon ami, you seek a resolution that satisfies the heart, but the heart is rarely satisfied. Justice, it is the restoration of order, not of harmony. At Blackthorn Manor, we have brought light to the shadows, but the shadows of grief, they linger. It is the way of things. Hastings nodded, his mind returning to the crimson lantern, its glow now a memory, but its significance etched in his soul. That lantern, Sherlock, it was more than a trap, more than a symbol. It was alive in a way, wasn't it? A witness to everything. Sherlock's lips curved into a faint smile. Bien dit, Hastings. The lantern was the soul of the mystery, a relic of tradition, a tool of deceit, a mirror of the human heart. Clara saw it as a beacon of truth, Mrs. Whitmore as a weapon to guard her secret. For me, it was the fulcrum of the case, its light revealing the contradictions that led to the killer. Hastings leaned forward, his voice low. And the rose in Clara's room. I keep thinking about it. You said it might have been from Mrs. Whitmore, a gesture of guilt or trust. Do you think Clara suspected her? Sherlock's eyes gleamed with quiet intensity. The rose, Hastings, was a whisper of the heart. Clara kept it, wilted though it was, perhaps because it came from someone she trusted or pitied. Mrs. Whitmore, as Ellen Carver, may have given it as a token, a plea for understanding, before her desperation turned to murder. Clara's curiosity, her need to uncover the truth about the papers, made her a threat. The rose was Mrs. Whitmore's attempt to soften that threat, but it failed. Hastings sighed, the image of the wilted rose vivid in his mind. It's tragic, Sherlock. Clara, so young, so determined. Mrs. Whitmore, driven by love for a daughter she could never claim. And the Ashbys left to pick up the pieces. Sherlock's voice was steady, almost philosophical. Tragedy, mon ami, is the shadow cast by choice. Mrs. Whitmore chose to protect her secret at all costs, and Clara chose to pursue the truth. Their paths collided under the lantern's light, and we were merely the interpreters of that collision. The little grey cells, they find the truth, but they cannot undo the pain. The train slowed as it approached London's bustling station, the platform alive with the hum of travellers. Haste persists. They have the truth, and that is a foundation, however fragile. As they stepped onto the platform, the cool night air enveloped them, carrying the familiar scents of London, cold smoke, wet stone, and the promise of new beginnings. Hastings paused, turning to his friend. "And us, Sherlock? What's next? Another case, another puzzle?" Sherlock's eyes twinkled with a familiar spark. "Always, mon ami. The world is full of mysteries, of shadows waiting for the light of reason. But for tonight we rest. The Crimson Lantern has taught us much, of love, of betrayal, of the delicate balance of truth. We carry its lessons forward."
They walked through the bustling station, the crowd parting around Sherlock's commanding presence. Hastings felt a quiet pride, not just in his friend's brilliance, but in their shared pursuit of justice. The case of Blackthorn Manor was closed, its secrets laid bare, but its echoes would linger, a reminder of the cost of truth and the power of the little grey cells. As they hailed a cab, the city's lights reflected in Sherlock's eyes, a promise of new challenges to come. The crimson lantern was behind them, its glow extinguished, but the memory of its light and the truth it revealed would burn brightly in the annals of Sherlock Holmes' remarkable career.